Ryan, what the
Mhm.
offense needs to look like. What are changes that need to happen right now that Drew Pyne is a quarterback? This is the final piece, and we'll get to a little bit of a mailbag here for a little bit once we wrap this up. But let's talk about what the offense needs to look like structurally now that Drew Pyne is a quarterback. Number one,
Sure.
push the tempo more.
Mhm.
As I asked Coach Freeman about this yesterday, and I really liked his answer because he said what I would do. I am not going to all of a sudden become 2010 Oregon. I'm not. That's not what I'm talking about. But I do think, especially early, that they do need to push the tempo. I have
Mhm.
no problem with the check with me stuff. Every
Right.
spread tempo team has that as part of what they do, including Chip Kelly when he was at Oregon back in the day. They would line up real fast, get it, fake a snap, and then check. Now, they were never going to snap the ball in that particular instance. But then you look at the sideline, you get a check with me. They're doing that way too much at Notre Dame. There needs to be times where if they came out in a series and just went fast, the other team wouldn't know what hit them
Right.
because teams know they have all day to kind of get lined up against Notre Dame. And you're doing that, but then you're not doing the multiplicity within that you need to do in order to be effective snapping the ball late. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're saying is like when you give a team, down to the 5-second mark to get lined up and you kind of get a read on what they're doing, it makes it a lot easier to defend. And
Didn't
so
I think this past game, Brian, didn't Marshall have like two different penalties where they had too many men on the field? And I
yes,
was just like, Notre Dame's not even running with incredible pace.
that
That
made no
only
sense to me.
proves. I know, it
Yeah.
was so weird,
Yeah.
man.
It
It's
made
so
no sense to
weird.
me. So when you look at that, it's
Mhm.
coming out with a little bit more purpose, a little bit more. Because see, sometimes here's the thing: sometimes in order to get your players playing with more urgency, you have to force it on them.
Sure.
The way you force it, because what do we keep talking? There's no urgency. There's no urgency getting lined up. There's no urgency coming off the ball. There's no urgency. So what do you do to do that? You speed up their mind, right? You speed up
Mhm.
their minds, which then speeds up their bodies. And what I mean by that is get lined up. Let's go, 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 go. Have you ever been at a practice of a team that runs tempo?
Oh
It
yeah.
is intense.
Sure
I mean,
is.
it is an intense, high stress type of situation.
It's a
And
workout too. It's a
oh
workout,
man.
man.
And so again, I'm not saying do that all the time. I'm not a tempo guy, but we advocated for this early last year as well. Because here's the deal. If Notre Dame would have played Ohio State and Marshall in the first two games last year, they probably start last year 0-2 for
Yeah.
many of the same reasons, right? Especially offensive line wise. And what did we advocate at the time? You got to come out and you've got to go with more tempo. You've got to run RPOs. You've got to go with more tempo. You've got to pick up the pace. And when they finally did that, Ryan, the offense took off. And it wasn't just taking off because they played bad teams, because they played Toledo. Toledo was a mediocre MAC team. That's it. And they looked like garbage. They
Yep.
offensively did not look good against a Purdue team that honestly didn't have a great defense last year, as they showed against like Ohio State and other teams. Like they had a couple good players and they tried hard and coached well and all that, but they weren't super talented.
Right.
They should have held Notre Dame to 27 points. They had to push the tempo a little bit. They need to do something that sparks this unit. And I think just pushing the tempo early and just getting Drew into a rhythm is super important against Cal. And it's something that needs to be a part of their arsenal week after week. And then you can do some of the other things, Ryan, like more movement. Now, this is
Yep.
going to seem contradictory. And it somewhat is, but it's not. Because again, I'm not talking about being 2010 Oregon. That's not what we're
Right.
talking about. Get lined up, get your call in, get lined up. Honestly, if I was Tommy Rees, I would start scripting every series. I would for now, because you got to come out with at least 3 plays that we're running on the first 3 plays of this series every time and just get it called. Here's what we're doing. Get it called. Doesn't matter what happens on first down. If it's 2nd and 12, then the next call, what the next call is going to be, and you go. You get lined up and you run it. And so those are things that I need to see from them this week, where it's more moving. What I mean by that is, they'll just kind of line up and stack. They'll come out in one play and be a normal trips formation or a normal, deuce personnel with 2 receivers here, then a wing tight end and a guy in the boundary, and just normal 2x2, and then they'll run their stuff out of it. They'll do like simple motions across the tight end, a little boom by the running. That's not what I'm talking about. And then jet. What I'm talking about is like start in a base alignment and then flip and shift real quick, or motion Braden Lindsey down to get him off the press. Motion Lorenzo Styles across. Line up in a deuce formation where you've got the tight end attached the boundary. You got your W off the line. You got your Z and your X, and then motion your W across to gain leverage. right? And then do a quick rollout and get a leverage play that way, or do a bubble screen that way, or do something that way. There needs to be more of that as well. And it needs to be called. Get lined up and call it. Run it and motion and call it. That's tempo, but it's not, again, we're not talking about 2010 Oregon tempo, but it's playing with a sense of purpose. I think those are things that are going to allow Drew Pyne to get into a really early rhythm, and it's important for him to do that, and it's important for the offense to do that because they need confidence. Ryan, we said it last week. This is an offense that needs confidence. They didn't get it. Yeah. And then the last two things for me is less scheme, more personnel and formational diversity. Right now, they've done a decent amount of formational diversity. They've done 21 personnel, 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. But everything is kind of, what they're running out of 21, what they're running out of 12, what they're running out of 11. What I'm saying is less scheme and then doing it out of all of that stuff. Figure out a way, because this is what good teams do. What do we want to run this week? We want to run an inside zone, we're on a duo, we're on a counter, we're on an outside zone, and then this other, a buck sweep. Okay. Okay. Figure out a way to run it out of everything that we do. How are we going to run out of 11 this week? How are we going to run it out of 12 this week? How are we going to run it out of 21 this week? And then how are we going to run it out of 10 or whatever else that you're going to do? Right. Which I don't know if I'd ever do 10 personnel right now with Notre Dame, but just in theory. Right. And then say, okay, now let's fit. Okay. Here's the concepts we want to do off of that pass game wise, to where now everything just kind of goes together more, Ryan. And it's not as easy to get a tell on what they're doing. That's another thing I want to see. And finally, the last thing for me, Ryan, is 12 personnel needs to become a much less important part of this situation, because you used to run in the past because you could get something out of it run game wise. George Takis brought value as a blocker last year. Tommy Tremble, my frustration was he didn't get used enough in the pass game, but he brought a lot of value as a blocker. Brock Wright brought a lot of value as a blocker. I'm seeing no value right now with Kevin Bauman as a blocker. None. And I said this to you before the show. I think you could make a case that the guy that gave the best effort and had the best execution in the run game at tight end on Saturday was Eli Raridan. And that's a problem.
Who's viewed as an undersized tight end that, well, not undersized as in length, but undersized as in weight, and had to put weight on, right? And coming off of an offseason injury. It's troubling, man. I think that the biggest thing for me, Brian, that you echoed a couple times, and I want to reiterate it again because it's so important for a couple different reasons, is to get Drew Pyne in rhythm. Why is it important? You mentioned confidence, but even more than that, Brian, like his style of quarterback is a player that needs to be in rhythm. If he's a guy that gets pushed too much out of structure too often, he's going to make some bad decisions. Like, it's just going to happen. It's not his game, man. He is the modern spread quarterback where he wants to get the ball out of his hands quick and make accurate decisions. That's what he wants to do. And that is so important for the timing. It's so important for being in a good, positive rhythm all the time, right? So that for me is like, I would not even be opposed to them throwing the ball a little bit early in the game just to get him in somewhat of a rhythm, right? Because I just think that you need to show that there's a threat to throw the football and get the numbers in your favor. Like, that stuff needs to happen. So getting him in rhythm is paramount in this football game. It needs to happen because it's how he wins. He is not the type of player where, I go through 1, 2, 3. It's okay. I'm going to break the pocket and I'm going to make something happen. Like, that's not Drew Pyne. It's not.
Right.
He can do a little stuff out of structure, but you don't want that to be you don't want it to be a large portion of his game.
It needs to complement all the other things that he's doing.
Yes.
100%. Correct. And that's going to be the key. And then that stuff will then set up the opportunities to take shots down, because Drew Pyne is not a drop back launch at 60-yard kind of guy. He's not. He can throw it deep enough to where you can hurt teams with the stuff we've seen, the one-on-one goes, the one-on-one posts. He can hit those, right? And I would run some of those. I would design a shot early and say, hey, we got to get something going, man. Like if you get if you get it the first, this is what I'd say if I'm Tommy Rees. The first time we get into a 2nd and 2 or a 2nd and 1 or even a 2nd and 3 in this game, I am going deep. Right. And I'm probably doing it out of 12 personnel. I'm going to purposely line up in 12 personnel and do that stupid double wing thing that they're doing and then just say, Drew, we know what we're going to get. They're going to bring that safety down. They're going to be in a cover 1. They're going to leave the field outside guy lined up. You are catching it. You're catching. drop and rock, and throw it. That's it. That's it. Right? And let her go. And then say, hey, it's up to you to go win. Hey, Lorenzo, go win. Braden, go win. Right, Drew? Flip and get it out there. Or I mean, if you want to design a post route or something else, but you get the point that I'm making. It doesn't have to be that particular play, but do something where I'm taking a design shot. Because if you start hitting one or two of those, then the next couple teams are like, okay, because here's the thing. Other teams know that Notre Dame's getting guys open deep. They just don't think they can protect it or hit it.
Right.
And as soon as you do, though, especially against a defense like Cal, who is going to be one of the 4 or 5 best defenses they're going to face all year. That's my concern about this game. This is going to be one of the 4 or 5 best. It's one of the 2 or 3 best coached defenses they're going to play all year, right? Their talent is getting better. They actually have some pretty deep. They have a kid that rotates in on the D line that got offered by Notre Dame, Xavier Carlton, who's a physical freak.
44 went to Utah.
He's a physical freak, but he's kind of a raw football player.
Yes.
But he's a physical freak. I had Daniel Scott and Jackson Sermon on my all opponent first team going into the year.
Number 10 at linebacker's not a bad little football player either.
Right. Their 2 edge players are decent players. So this is a team with decent talent on defense, really good coaching on defense, pretty decent depth on defense as well, Ryan. And like I said, very well coached and tough. This is going to be a great test because if Notre Dame's offense breaks out this week, and I'm not saying it's going to, I'm not predicting that, but if it does, that's a great sign because this is a much better defense than what you faced last week. And we both thought a lot of Marshall's defense for that level.
Sure did.
But Notre Dame, Marshall didn't stop Notre Dame as much as Notre Dame stopped Notre Dame because the things Marshall was doing to stop the run game were leaving them exposed to big plays down the field. Notre Dame just didn't hit them. I mean, there should have been 3 60-yard touchdowns on Saturday. I mean, I'm not talking about like, oh, you should just dudes open for those type of plays.
Not like a 50-50 ball type of thing.
No, we're talking dude is open by 3 or 4 steps, right? And you just got to hit him. And so that was the frustrating thing for me. So 12 personnel is really not bringing you value right now. So unless you're going to make the move and put Eli Raridan, I was told that Kane Barong has finally been cleared. I'd give him a shot because I think he's a pretty good blocker. I don't know where he is at with like his strength and his knee and all that. But I'd give those guys a shot because Kevin Bauman may be a great kid, but this is not what was the big concern we had about him in the offseason? He wasn't a very good blocker last year. Now, he was hurt and he had all those other things. People say, well, is he hurt still? Because he's not blocking very well now. And that's another personnel change that I would strongly consider making is that. And I would play Raridan, Barong, and Holden Stace more as that number 2 tight end. But 12 personnel, unless you're willing to make a change, needs to be de-emphasized, in my opinion. It does.
I really want to start seeing Raridan and Holden Stace play, Brian. I do. Because, again, I don't want Kevin Bauman to just be off.
You could put all your freshmen in the first 2 games, and guess what your record would be? Same as it is now.
100%.
You could have started an all-freshman offensive team on the first 2 weeks, and now it wouldn't have been as competitive, but your record would be the same. So what if seriously, you don't have anything to lose. You're 0-2. You just lost at home to Marshall, right? There is no, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. No. To a degree, that's true. But in a lot of other areas, it's like, you know what? We gave you a chance, and we're going to go with the more talented kid. Because the problem is you're playing – it'd be one thing if you were making mistakes with the more talented player. Say, look, he'll get it right. But you're making mistakes with guys that aren't as talented. And that's where I can't accept that. I can't accept that. So put the talented kids out there, give them confidence, let them play, do things to get Drew Pyne rolling, or he needs early success. I'll say this. If Drew Pyne starts 8 of 8 against Cal the way that Tyler did against Ohio State, this is going to be a very fun game to watch.
Yes.
Unless it's like a bunch of garbage. Because it was 8 of 8, but 128 yards. I mean, if he hit an RPO, it's like that level of success, then this is going to be a fun game. Because I do think of what it'll signify. And it'll get Drew comfortable and confident because Drew Pyne is in desperate need of an infusion of confidence. The way that he's played in the spring, the way that he played against Marshall, the things that we saw at some of the practices. This is a kid who's regressed as a player. Now my hope is that he gets back to being the Drew Pyne that's doing the Conor McGregor strut after throwing a touchdown pass last year. A kid who thinks he's better than he is. I actually want that kid back. And if he can do that, and they can scheme some things to help them out, Ryan, then I think this team's got a chance to get this thing rolling again.